All right. Good afternoon and welcome to Function's Construct Knowledge series, an educational webinar event hosted by Function that delivers insights on the latest issues impacting the marketing and specification of building products. I'm Ted Heddick. I'll be moderating this second part of our spring edition called Transparency to Specification, Translating Sustainable Product Claims. Transparency to Specification is a webinar covering how emerging trends such as environmental product declarations and life cycle analysis impact product specification. The discussion features perspectives and insights from a diverse group of industry professionals who are experts in their respective fields. We ran short on time during part one, so we will be having a Q&A with the panelists at the end of this webinar. So please submit any questions you have. The recording from part one is available on our website if you missed it for download, but we covered environmental product declarations, life cycle analysis, embodied energy, carbon footprints, and more. To submit questions, simply use the question function through the GoToWebinar app, or you can submit through Twitter using the hashtag FunctionWebinar. Part two will also be available for download on our website on the same page, probably next week sometime. So here's an overview of part two. We'll be discussing how EPDs interact with LEED, EPDs and third-party verifications, EPDs and industry standards and regulations, green product certifications, and greenwashing. Now I'd like to introduce our panelists. We have the same group from part one, including Kate Simonen. She's a registered architect, a lead AP, and assistant professor at the University of Washington College of Built Environments in the Department of Architecture. We have Heather Gadonniex, strategic development and innovation with UL Environment. Heather's a lead AP and GRI certified sustainability reporter. Francesca Desmarais, she's a research associate with Architecture 2030 and the director of the 2030 Challenge for Products. And we have Derek Teal, who is the editor of Environmental Design and Construction, which is the official magazine for LEED professionals. So let's go ahead and continue the conversation. Hang on one second while we patch in all of our panelists. Okay, with so much at stake, how can verification be truly unbiased and uninfluenced? One potential just kind of flag that came up in my head with EPDs is, how can this be a process that doesn't get influenced by all of the people involved?
Kate, I think I'll talk a little to that, if that's okay. I think the ISO standards for developing product category rules and environmental product declarations and managing an EPD operator process are very clearly developed to help limit the risk of that happening. And I think a lot of it is going to fall on the responsibilities of the EPD operator in developing and managing the process in an open and transparent manner. So in developing a product category rule, it's important that the product category rules are harmonized across existing international standards. There's ASTM work going on right now to develop standards for product category rules of building products in the United States. So an EPD operator who makes sure that the open comment period for product category rules is managed effectively will ensure that there are good comments, diverse comments put into the development of those product category rules, and a reputable program operator then will be verifying those EPDs and have a brand to maintain. So an EPD product or operator is in a lot of ways like an accounting verifier. I'm not sure if that's the right term. But when you do, and this is environmental accounting versus economic accounting, we trust people to do their economic accounting correctly, and they do get, auditing, is that correct? Right? Mm-hmm. Economic accounting gets audited by external auditors. Sometimes people lie in their economic accounting, and they lose their reputation. Same thing would happen in environmental accounting.
Okay. Okay, yeah, that makes sense. Thanks, Kate. So the EPD operator would be sort of tasked to go in and make sure that manufacturers are complying with the third-party verification.
Well, the role of the Environmental Product Declaration Program Operator, such as UL Environment, the role is really to ensure that there's something called Program Operator Rules developed for the open governance and transparent governance of that EPD program, and also to ensure that the program is run against those Program Operator rules and then run in accordance with ISO 14025. So part of the standards within ISO 14025, as Kate was mentioning, EPD harmonization is a huge component of that. We're working actively on global harmonization as well. So in addition to the ASTM standard that's being worked on, there's actually already a document that's been released through CEN in Europe called, I don't know the reference number, what is it, 16804. So there's a lot of activity going on globally right now that will pull and tie all of these disparate efforts, global efforts for creating environmental product declarations together. And the program operator responsibility is not only to ensure that the EPD itself is credible, that the life cycle assessment has been verified in accordance with ISO 14025 and program operator rules, and that the EPD has been verified against the PCR, but also to ensure that this global harmonization is becoming a reality. Because if we have EPDs here that can't be used in Europe, then what's the point of creating them? Manufacturers are going to have to comply with 15 different systems around the world. So I think that's really important to consider. And then also just the governance of the program, making sure that life cycle assessment protocols are being followed, making sure that the product category rules are being followed, making sure that PCRs are developed in a credible way. ISO is a guideline. It's not a regulation. So it's up to the program operator to ensure that that guideline is being followed. And the rigor of the program operator really determines the credibility of the PCR and the credibility of the EPD.
Okay, that's great. Thanks. All right. How do EPDs and LCAs affect LEED certification and LEED credits? How is EPD and LCA going to come into play with LEED? Kate, did you want to answer this one?
Okay. I guess the answer is that right now it is evolving. So as in the draft form of LEED, there are credits related to using products or a certain percentage of products that have environmental product declarations, so rewarding transparency.
So what we originally saw, that was the first integration of EPDs into LEED. This was with the release of Pilot Credit 43. And Pilot Credit 43 essentially had two paths to achieving this pilot credit. The first was through third-party certification, and then the second path was through environmental product declarations. So products that actually could demonstrate that they had a third-party certified environmental product declaration could contribute to this pilot credit at up to 200% of the total value of the product itself. Now what we're seeing is an actual full credit. I think it's called material assessment and disclosure at this point. I guarantee you that will change, but we're still in the draft phase. And in that material assessment and disclosure credit, essentially what has happened is that it's evolved from Pilot Credit 43. That second column in Pilot Credit 43 has now been broken out into a specific credit focusing on environmental product declarations. So manufacturers that have third-party certified environmental product declarations again, third-party certified by a program operator, disclosing information against EN 15804 will contribute to that credit. In theory, if it passes the way it is. That credit also has two different alternative assessment routes. So one is looking at recycled content and recyclability of products, and the second is looking at, I think, local and regional aspects of product production. So we're definitely seeing an evolution of a LEED rating system to include more information about material disclosure, material transparency, and disclosure of items such as carbon footprint through the use of EPDs. This is not only happening here, but also globally. So right now we're looking at different green building councils throughout the world, USGBC India, USGBC Italia. They're also looking at incorporating EPDs based upon what USGBC National has done here.
Okay, great. Let's stick on LEED for a second. And you kind of talked about this already, Heather, just now. But I guess kind of EPDs aside, how has the evolution of LEED, in your opinion, how has it impacted building products, both on the manufacturing side and on the specification side?
Yeah, I think that one thing the USGBC is really doing well, there's been a lot of hoopla around this new MR section, but one thing that the USGBC has been really committed to is expanding the thinking around products from focusing on single attributes to focusing on a more holistic system. Thinking about products from a systems perspective, thinking about products in a global perspective of sustainability. And that evolution, I think, is really exciting. And you know, we're seeing that throughout the entire MR section. We're also seeing that in other sections of the LEED draft.
Okay, great. Derek, did you have something to add?
Yeah, I think Heather was right on with what's happening. And, you know, as LEED buildings become more and more popular, you know, manufacturers, they want to make money and they want to sell their product. And as LEED buildings become more popular, they're going to be taking up more of the market share. Products that get into LEED buildings are going to be taking up more of the market share. And manufacturers are going to want to get their products in there. And so in those buildings, so you've got to do what it takes to get your product, to sell your product and get it into these buildings. And if that means changing how you manufacture a product, you're going to do it to make sure it gets in there, and then you maintain that, maintain your own market share in your industry.
So I think we're seeing Living Building Challenge as well being a pretty big influencer of all of this. So that's also pretty exciting.
Okay, great, thanks. And let's talk about green product certifications for a moment. Do you think that, I know there's a lot of them right now, do you think that they're important to product specifiers, or are these green product certifications something that they really take into consideration?
This is Heather. You know, I really think they are, and I think that specifiers do actively use them, particularly the more popular ones like GreenGuard for indoor air quality or the CRI program for carpet. There's been a lot of use of these certifications to denote, again, this quick preference of environmental preferability. And that's something that an EPD is not going to replace. If you want to write into a spec and have specific information about a product, again, just an example, indoor environmental quality, then GreenGuard or any other indoor air quality certification is really going to be the tool that you're going to want to use to get that specific attribute across. So I think that while the specification sophistication is evolving, to be able to analyze products, again, from this more holistic perspective, those certifications that denote environmentally preferability or focus on one attribute or aspect of a product are not necessarily going to disappear. They may be integrated into an EPD so that you have a one-stop shop for looking at information, but they're still extremely important.
Okay, Anyone else?
Yeah, just sort of, I don't know that when an architect or a specifier is communicating with his or her client, I don't know that the client is necessarily going to be an expert in the industry and be able to, while they're having seen a few EPDs, they're not exactly difficult to understand. But I think saying something like a third-party certified standard like GreenGuard is a lot more, or Energy Star is a lot more recognizable, and immediately, and you can get an immediate response from a client as opposed to presenting them with an EPD that they might look at and not know where to begin, but reading it. But if you say it's GreenGuard certified, does it meet your IAQ standards? Does this meet your IAQ standards? Is GreenGuard certified? Then they'll, okay, that's good, let's go with that. Or something, you know, if it comes down to a client actually having to make a decision on something, or if you're having to verify cost with a client for something, if it comes down to construction costs or something like that.
Yeah, that's a good point.
And so those green standards or certifications are providing the interpretation of the data. So getting the data clearly out there is what the EPD does, helping to evaluate that data and make judgments on about environmentally preferable products, or what areas you're focusing on will still be valuable, because it helps people not have to go through the process of setting those criteria themselves, so that if somebody else is setting a criteria that they respect, then they will be able to adopt products based on that criteria rather than diving deep into the data. The data will enable people to make better recommendations.
Kate, that's a really great point. And I think that brings up another one of the functions that an EPD can serve. So the general idea is that once we have data behind a product category, we can then use that data to create a performance baseline. And that performance baseline can influence Type 1 certification. So the Type 1 certification is a multi-attribute certification that denotes the product's environmental preferability based upon life cycle thinking. And one of the main tenets of the Type 1 certification is that it focuses on looking at a life cycle assessment and using a baseline to understand your performance threshold, so that you can actually determine which products are environmentally preferable and which products are not. So as Kate said, once we have this data, then we can actually improve the Type 1 certifications, or these seal of approvals that we're currently using.
And that's really the goal of the 2030 Challenge for Products, is to specifically use the data presented in EPDs to better inform the preferencing of low-carbon products and sort of reducing the carbon impact from building products in the building sector. So it's so key to get that data out there first.
Okay, that's great. Thanks, everyone. My next question is, there's a lot of them out there, which green product certifications are the most influential to architects and specifiers? Derek, did you want to start with that one?
Sure. Mentioned a couple earlier. Heather, I also mentioned two, or was it Kate? GreenGuard, CRI, Energy Star, FSC, WaterSense, Green Spec. I think there's Floor Scores, also another popular one. Green Seal. Those are the ones that immediately come to mind.
All right. Heather, did you have anything to add?
I think that pretty much covers it.
Okay.
I'm a little biased too, so maybe I'll refrain from answering that one.
No. Okay. My next question is, do EPDs simplify labels and certifications? Why or why not?
So they are probably it's more information on the label, but it would simplify interpretation of that information, because you could go back and understand you could look at an EPD, and if you're curious about what was included in that Reporting, you could go back and look at the product category rule and understand how that EPD was generated. So it simplifies the understanding and interpretation of reported information.
That's perfect. Did anyone else have anything to add?
I wouldn't necessarily lump EPD and simple in the same bucket.
Yeah.
They're pretty complex documents. And it definitely takes a trained individual to understand how to use them. I think that we'll get to the point where they're simplified, but as of now, I wouldn't put those two words in the same sentence. I think that the EPD information can be used to simplify, the EPD information can be used to create simplified labels that denote environmental preferability. But if the EPD is not going to necessarily simplify labeling.
Okay, good answers. And yeah, I agree. I think with anything so new and potentially complex, there's definitely going to be a learning curve. Okay, just a few more questions. Does the trend toward transparency, talking about being very clear on your manufacturing processes and what goes into a product, does this trend towards transparency signal the end for products that aren't sustainably manufactured? Francesca, would you like to answer that?
Sure. So I think this trend towards transparency has been gaining momentum for a very long time. And EPDs and greater product transparency certainly accelerate this momentum, but ultimately it comes down to how this information is used. Having the data is one thing, but being able to correctly understand it and correctly read it, and then, again, using that data to maybe do more type 1 labels or product preferential systems, using that data is going to be key to driving the market towards sustainably manufactured building products. So EPDs are a great step in the right direction, but we still need to have wider proliferation of EPDs and a better understanding of how to use them and a very well-educated building sector.
Derek, did you have anything to add on that?
Yeah, basically the same thing that Francesca just said, except green sustainable construction is still a relatively small percentage of the overall construction going on in North America, and it is a good step in the right direction, but I don't know if that necessarily means it's going to be transparency is going to be the end of products that are not sustainably manufactured.
And I think you could argue that really no products are being manufactured in a truly sustainable way right now. And so I think that improving transparency and motivating towards a full life cycle understanding of a product from manufacturing through use to disposal will help identify that the trade-offs that are made in the different phases of a life cycle and where it is more important to focus on a process improvement and where it is less important to do so. So there is a constant pushback and forth between the in-use performance benefits versus the potential manufacturing challenges. And so having a full life cycle understanding and reporting of the data helps to balance those things. So I think it helps us move towards a more sophisticated understanding of what it might mean to be having truly sustainable building products and construction.
Okay, great. Thanks, Kate.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more with what everybody just said, and this is definitely a topic that my friends and colleagues and I sit around discussing, philosophizing about. At the end of the day, we always come to the conclusion that having more information is better. And regardless of if that's going to necessarily create a a society whereby we have fully sustainable manufacturing systems. Is that utopia never going to exist? I personally don't think so, but at least we have more information. And the better information we have, the better decisions we can make. And at the end of the day, I think that's really where we need to push at the moment. We really need to be understanding more about our products that we're putting in our homes, that we're putting in our buildings, that we're purchasing every day. And if we can understand more, then we can make more informed purchase decisions. And if we can make more informed purchasing decisions, then we can start to influence how products are manufactured and produced.
And likewise, responsible manufacturers are looking to influence their own purchasing decisions. Where are they purchasing products from? How are they manufacturing? And so being clear about understanding a manufacturer's impact helps somebody understand the potential for improvement. Sometimes improvement is really easy, and sometimes it's hard. But being clear about what is possible and moving towards that improvement is a sign of a manufacturer that's responsible and that should be supported.
Okay, great. And question on greenwashing. We've seen a lot of it, and it's become very prevalent, I would say, over the last several years. So I'm wondering how you guys think EPDs and transparency are going to affect greenwashing, and not just real blatant greenwashing, but some vague product claims. Derek, did you want to start with that?
How is it going to affect greenwashing? Well, I think if it's going to be like the proof is in the pudding, so to speak. Like you can put that, put your money where your mouth is. How many other different cliches can I spew? But if you have it in an EPD, people would say, well, just provide me with this. If you're so sure on your product, why don't you give me this information? Like you say, it's all this. Well, if you get one of these done, then I can take a look at that, and I can judge for myself how green your product is, or if your product meets the green requirements that I'm looking for. And I don't know if it'll put an end to it, but it will be a way of people to verify if the claims are true or not.
Yeah, and it would obviously be a very risky move for a manufacturer to continue a misleading claim and then put contradictory information out there in an EPD for their product. Did anyone else have anything to add?
Well, this is Kate. I would say that is one of the primary ways that data can be presented in a way that can be seen as greenwashing is by selecting how you report the data in such a way that your product is favorable. So in doing a life cycle assessment, there are decisions that have to get made. And if those decisions aren't made in a consistent way, each manufacturer could make their choices based on making their product look preferable. That is what the product category rules do, is they make the rules about how the life cycle assessment should be done so that all of those assumptions are the same. And that, I think, will help manufacturers not be tempted to make the choices that make their products look preferable. And you really can't blame people from wanting to focus on the benefits of their own product. So environmental product declarations do help remove some of the temptations by making standardized methodologies on how to report data.
Excellent. Thanks, Kate. I did have one follow-up question to a term that was brought up several times earlier. I'd like to come back to it, and I don't remember exactly what it was. Stage 1 or Class 1 part of an EPD?
Oh, Type 1, Type 2, and Type 3 labels. Is that what you're asking?
Yes. Could you explain the difference between the Type 1, Type 2, and Type 3 labels?
Sure. So under ISO 1420, the 14020 series, there are 3 types of environmental labels that are specifically, or that ISO specifically provides guidance on. The first type is a Type 1, and that Type 1 is your seal of approval type of label. It's a multi-attribute assessment, based upon multi-attribute criteria that looks at a product over the full life cycle. And traditionally, there's also a performance baseline that label is based upon. So you can denote, like I said, environmental preferability within a product category. Typically, examples of this are DO Environment Sustainable Product Certification label. Green Seal is a really great example of a Type 1 label. Eco Logo has Type 1 labels as well. Type 2 refers to a manufacturer-based claim, and the ISO guidelines for Type 2 labels, or Type 2 claims, I should say, not really labels, it's not like you get a seal of approval, but the ISO guidelines for Type 2 claims lay out specific guidance parameters for things like calculating recycled content, for example. So if a manufacturer wanted to report recycled content in their product, they would use this calculation method to actually calculate the total amount of recycled content. Oftentimes, certification bodies will verify those types of claims as well. And then Type 3, which is ISO 14025, is the guidance document that covers the creation of the environmental product declarations. So the EPD is the Type 3 label, if you want to call it that.
Excellent. Thank you, Heather. And thanks to all of our panelists. Great information. I really appreciate you taking the time to join us and shed some light on this topic. And now I'd like to go ahead and open it up for a little Q&A session with our panelists while we still have them. So don't be shy. Please submit some questions. We have a few. I'd like to start with from part one, if we can. I'll start with Heather, if you can speak to this one. How will the delay of releasing the new lead system affect the adoption of EPDs?
Hi, everybody. Thanks again for having me on this webinar. I do think that we're going to see a bit of delay from manufacturers that were originally going to pursue creating EPDs this year, but we're actually not seeing a lot of it. And I think that's being driven by the fact that a lot of the manufacturers that were already committing to producing EPDs or committing to exploring producing EPDs are doing it more to take a leadership position. And we're also seeing the architecture and design firms that were using, or are, I should say, using this type of information, then users who are using this type of information from environmental product declarations, staying the course. So while we do have, a bit of a transition period while Lead V4 is developed and released, there's still that demand in the market that is requesting information like carbon, footprint of products and other specific environmental attributes in a fully transparent, disclosed manner. In addition, we're not seeing any global demands changing. So those manufacturers that are dealing with the global marketplace are still needing to meet the needs of various other green building programs around the world and other procurement policies from cities like NASDAQ, for example.
Okay, very good. Kate, did you want to add anything?
Nope, I agree with Heather.
Okay, perfect. And here's an interesting question. This is kind of challenging. I'm not sure how you guys are going to respond to this one, but what material would be considered the most environmentally friendly? I'm not sure there's an answer to that, but if you have one.
I'll take it. This is Kate. I think there's been a lot of effort of trying to use life cycle assessment to demonstrate that one material is better than another. So most notably in structural materials, comparing a wood to a concrete house or a steel to a concrete office building, and trying to come to a conclusion that one is better than the other. And an interesting result of all of these different studies is, depending on the boundaries of the study, the results come out differently. And so environmental product declarations are not formulated to be able to tell whether or not wood is better than concrete per se. Generally they're providing cradle to gate information if we're looking at materials. So cradle to gate of a glue laminated beam or cradle to gate of a cubic yard of concrete. And a glue laminated beam cannot be compared to a cubic yard of concrete because they are not the same thing. So in life cycle assessment, use the term functional unit or functional equivalent. So we would need to be looking at functional equivalences between floors, for example, to compare a concrete floor to a wood floor. And the environmental product declaration will not tell you that one is better than the other, but rather be able to give you information in which you could assess a comprehensive system based on different materials.
Okay,
that
very
get to
good.
The point of that?
I think that was a great answer. All right, we have one more from the first session that I'd like to address now, and that is, where would you rank product performance and longevity among attributes of a sustainable product?
So this is Heather. I'll take a first stab, and then Kate, I'm sure you have some thoughts on this as well. But you know, when looking at a product from a sustainability perspective, it's not enough just to look at one aspect or one attribute of that product in a silo unless you have a specific reason for doing so. So if one of the projects is that you want healthier indoor air quality, you might put a higher emphasis on products that are low zero VOC, for example. But looking at a product from a holistic lens of sustainability, you really need to take into consideration multiple attributes, of which durability and performance is one of them. I mean, at the end of the day, if you have a quote-unquote greener product, right, there's no true green product out there. If you have a greener product or a better product, if it doesn't perform and it doesn't last, then is that really a sustainable product? Is it really a greener product? You know, it's almost like there shouldn't be a differentiation between those two things. Performance and durability is an aspect that should be equally weighted and taken into consideration when looking at a product from a holistic lens.
So yes, I agree, and I would add to that environmental product declarations, some include information about durability and longevity, and some do not. So it depends on how the product category rule was set up and how the product category, the importance of that issue in a specific product category. So if you're reporting the environmental footprint of a glue laminated beam, the assumption is different manufacturers should have the same performance criteria. So within the product category rule would be ASTM standards about the durability of the glue systems or waterproofing assemblies. So they're attempting to be comparing apples to apples, but something like floor systems flooring might have a wider variety of durability in amongst different manufacturers. And so in order to use life cycle assessment data, there needs to be an interpretation and understanding of those issues in order to make a comprehensive life cycle assessment. You should also consider whether or not people are going to tear things out on their own, whether or not they've worn out.
Okay, that's a good point. All right. Here's one that just came through from one of our attendees. And I think we actually did talk a little bit about this during part one, but maybe we can just kind of recap a little bit of what we discussed previously. Where are we right now with EPDs? How is the building industry using EPDs currently? Are they using them in their projects? Are they just gathering them? Are they compiling EPDs? Or are they including these requirements in a spec?
This is Kate. I would say that in general, I see that the people that are using EPDs right now are looking to set themselves apart as leaders in the industry and responding to requests for this information from their customers. So, but I have heard anecdotally that it's starting to grow in the sense that once one manufacturer within a specific industry has an EPD, the marketing crew can use that information to demonstrate their leadership in environmental performance, and then competitors are looking to get EPDs as well. So I think right now the strongest driver is perceived leadership in response to requests from consumers. Would you agree with that, Heather?
Yeah, I think that in terms of specification, how they're being used, just to backtrack to that question, we're seeing questionnaires being developed from major purchasers, major land, maybe not land developers, but real estate developers, those that are kitting out a lot of real estate. And they're starting to ask for EPDs. Now, it's not that they're starting to ask for this specific information within the Environmental Product Declaration just yet, but they are starting to ask the question, does your product is there an accompanying EPD that we can see with XYZ product? So that's very encouraging, and these are pretty big players that are doing this. In addition, we're also seeing that in the AEC, the architecture and design firms as well. So certain firms are starting to incorporate into their kind of general, broader reaching sustainability procurement policies requests for environmental product declarations. And some have even gone so far as to request certain information within that EPD, whether it be carbon footprint information or some other life cycle backed piece of information, or even just information in general about, say an EPD transparency brief. We're starting to see that happen. And, as Kate mentioned, that is pushing down to the manufacturer level. In addition, there's definitely a we want to be first mentality out there. And I think that EPDs are giving those manufacturers that have the capability and that have kind of taken on the responsibility of doing life cycle assessment earlier on. Now they're having an ability to leverage that for marketing purpose. And they're seeing great results and great success with that. Granted, it is slower. It's not like all of a sudden, as soon as they published an EPD, they had 20 people knocking on their door trying to buy their product, but they are seeing it give them the ability to set up appointments more with architects, designers, and with the end user of the product itself. So yes, a long story short, we are starting to see traction in the market, and we've only gotten positive feedback from both our partners in the AEC side and also our manufacturing clients.
Okay. Thanks, Heather. If I could go back to Kate for 1 second, since you are a registered architect. Same question, but how is the architectural community utilizing EPDs currently?
I think it's more about desiring that information and wanting it more than actively using it. So I think that currently, there is growing interest to be able to understand quantifiable environmental impacts and have more information to interpret rather than less. So what I see is a growing interest in being able to access that data.
Okay, perfect. All right. A few more if everyone has time. Here's an interesting one. Might put you guys on the spot, but here goes. Do we know what the cost range might be for a manufacturer to obtain an EPD, and how is that determined?
It really depends on if they've conducted a life cycle assessment or not, and if they have in-house LCA capability or if they're using external LCA capability. So there's two cost components to the environmental product declaration. 3 if there's not a product category rule developed. The first would be the development of that product category rule, and oftentimes that cost is shared amongst multiple parties. So whether it be through an industry association or multiple manufacturers that are getting together to develop the PCR, that cost is often shared. The second cost is the cost of actually conducting the life cycle assessment. And again, that can range depending on the resource availability of either in-house or external personnel that are actually conducting that LCA. And then the third is the cost of verification and registration of the environmental product declaration itself. So it's definitely a range.
Okay.
And so that's not a very specific answer, right? But you know, some industry trade organizations are doing work to develop tools to enable their the creation of cost-efficient EPDs or LCAs for their products. So it also depends on the complexity of the product processes. So some products are assembling pre-manufactured, you know, just assembling materials, and other ones are actually manufacturing or, you know, having a chemical reaction take place. So that the analysis is more or less complex depending on the material and processes involved.
Okay, perfect. I've gotten a couple of questions from our attendees on this session about PCRs. Can we talk a little bit more about them? If you can describe how product category rules are created, what the process is, that would be great.
Sure. So ISO 14025 has a I wouldn't say robust, but a protocol to follow when creating product category rules. And first and foremost, one must develop a draft PCR or draft product category rule. That can be done by a program operator, that can be done by a consultant, that can be done by, you know, an industry association. But once that draft is developed, and that draft should be harmonized with any pre-existing PCRs that are available, both here and abroad. Once that draft is developed, it's then taken through something called open discussion. And that open discussion period is, depending on the timing, you know, it can range from 6 weeks to 6 months, depending on the product category and the amount of stakeholders involved. But that open discussion period gives external stakeholders the ability to comment on that product category rule and provide input and feedback to that product category rule. That process is usually run by an EPD program operator. The next step is to then take that draft that has gone through open discussion, finalize it based upon comments, stakeholder feedback, and then put it through a 3-person review panel. And that 3-person review panel can consist of a life cycle assessment practitioner, usually consists of somebody who really knows the product category well, and then somebody who's familiar with ISO 14025 and creation of environmental product declarations. So either, you know, somebody from academia, somebody from, you know, industry, it just depends upon that product category as well. And then from there, it's registered by a program operator, an EPD program operator for use. And once it's registered for use, it can be used publicly.
And so, for example, I've been working to develop, help develop product category rules for ready-mix concrete. And that effort both is involved in understanding the impacts of the materials that go into concrete, but it's also been trying to understand what's the appropriate method of allocating environmental impacts across multiple different industries and addressing U.S.-specific requirements. So there's an existing product category rule for concrete that was done in Europe, and it was very general. And the product category rule that we're developing for the United States is trying to be more specific and addressing things like ground granulated blast furnace slag is used as a cementitious material. It is blast furnace slag comes from the production of steel, and it is originally considered a waste product from steel that gets ground and granulated and used as a cementitious material. Should the environmental impacts related to the original steel production be allocated to the GGBFS, or should the environmental impacts of steel production all remain towards steel and that the impacts related to GGBFS original production be considered zero, that it's a waste product? So some of the part of the work of the PCR development is, I believe, will become more standardized as a standard such as the ASTM standard for product category rules of building products gets formalized, a lot of those decisions that we've had to work through should be able to be formalized in a national consensus standard, and so that the PCR for an individual product is more about looking into the unique manufacturing conditions of that product or the use phase implications. So for example, the PCR that's being developed for Windows right now is spending a lot of time figuring out the appropriate way of modeling use phase impacts of Windows. And so that the EPD will both report the embodied impacts as well as the use phase impacts of Windows, so users could compare both of those things.
Wow.
So
okay.
I guess my conclusion is there's a lot of technical detail stuff that gets into the PCR. That technical detail will become more and more standardized over the next few years.
Okay, perfect. All right, and we are getting real close to 5 o'clock, so let me close with this. There's a few more questions that we're not going to have time to answer. I will follow up with our attendees offline to get your questions answered, but we've talked about the ISO guidelines quite a bit. So what happens when the ISO guidelines change or evolve? How is that going to affect EPDs? Is it going to completely mess the whole system up? Anyone have any thoughts on that?
EPDs are already being used in Europe. The ISO standards development is dominated by European practitioners. I can't imagine that they would mess up the work that they've done. You agree, Heather?
I do, yeah. I don't think it's a matter of messing up or muddling up the system, because the system is very much established. It's just new to North America. So, you know, it's really up to the program operator. It's the responsibility of the program operator to ensure that their program operator rules are in line with ISO 14025 and harmonized. And, well, not harmonized, but in line with ISO 14025. I shouldn't use that word in that context. So if there are evolutions to the standard, which there will be, it's not going to disrupt the entire program to meet the continuing needs or the continuing evolution of that standard. And as Kate mentioned, this is a global system. This is a system that's been developed and used for the past, almost 10 years. So as long as there isn't a major disruption in that global system, then we'll be fine. As long as we're keeping on top of the changes and the evolution and incorporating those as necessary, I think that we'll be fine.
Okay, that's great. All right, thanks again. I very much appreciate your time, panelists, and all of our attendees. Thank you for tuning in. I think this was a really great session, and I appreciate your time and all of the thought that went into this. Again, this is Ted Heddick with Function, and we'll be having some more webinars coming up probably later this summer or early fall. So once again, thanks for attending, and I look forward to seeing you on the next one.
Thanks, Ted.
Thanks. Bye-bye.